She's a powerful CEO who can handle anything except showing up alone to the biggest gala of the year. So she hires a plumber, the same single dad who fixed her broken sink. What happens next? Let me know in the comments. Would you ever say yes to a deal like that? The morning started like any other until the sink exploded. Water sprayed across the marble counters of Clara Hayes's penthouse, turning her polished kitchen into a small disaster zone. She stood barefoot in silk pajamas, phone pressed to her ear, her voice clipped and urgent as she called for an emergency plumber. For a woman who ran one of Seattle's largest investment firms with flawless precision, this chaos felt almost personal, as if the universe itself had decided to test her patience before coffee. When the knock came, it was firm and steady, too steady for someone she imagined crawling under sinks all day. She opened the door and froze for half a beat. The man standing there didn't look like any plumber she'd ever met. "Evan Carter," he said with a quiet nod and a calm she found disarming. He carried a worn leather tool bag over one shoulder, and when their eyes met, his were a deep kind of blue, steady, grounded, like the sky right before rain. "Lead me to the battlefield," he said lightly, glancing past her at the flood. Clara stepped aside, her jaw tightening. "It's in there," she replied, trying to sound composed, though her mourning was anything but. Evan crouched beneath the sink, rolling up the sleeves of his faded flannel. Muscles flexed beneath a sun-worn skin. His hands, rough, capable, sure, moved with the confidence of someone who'd fixed far worse. The sound of his wrench clicking into the pipe echoed softly while Clara crossed her arms, watching. He wasn't rushing. He worked with a kind of calm patience that felt foreign in her world of constant deadlines and boardroom battles. "Could have been worse," he murmured. "I doubt it," she muttered, more to herself. He looked up briefly, smiling just enough to reach his eyes. "Trust me," he said, "I've seen worse." Something in the way he said it, steady, unbothered, pulled at her. For the first time in years, Clara found herself curious about someone who didn't live inside spreadsheets or stock projections. "You do this full time?" she asked. "Mostly," he said, tightening a bolt. "I take whatever work comes through. Got to keep things steady for my little girl." Her tone softened before she could stop it. "You have a daughter?" He nodded once, still focused on the pipe. "Lucy, she's 6, smarter than I'll ever be." Clara didn't know why that hit her the way it did. Something about the quiet pride in his voice, the warmth in the name Lucy. It wasn't just what he said, it was how he said it, as if love was a muscle memory. A final twist, a brief hum of satisfaction, and the water stopped. Evan stood, wiping his hands with a rag. "All set," he said simply. "Shouldn't give you trouble again." Clara let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Thank you." He nodded, gathering his tools. "Happy to help." But as he turned to leave, she found herself staring, not just at the calm confidence he carried, but at the quiet steadiness in him, the kind she'd once had, the kind she'd somehow lost somewhere between late-night meetings and impossible expectations. And as the door clicked shut behind him, Clara Hayes had no idea that this small, flooded morning would change everything. For 2 days, Clara tried to shake off the plumber from her mind, but his calm voice and steady eyes kept surfacing between meetings and memos. By the time Thursday arrived, she had another problem waiting, one that no amount of control could fix. The Emerald Gala, 48 hours away, and still no date. Her assistant had booked and canceled 3 potential candidates. One got cold feet, one got engaged, and one she simply couldn't stand for longer than a phone call. For someone who could close multi-million-dollar deals without blinking, the idea of showing up alone suddenly felt like failure. The gala wasn't just a party. It was the battlefield of the city's elite, where alliances were built over champagne and solitude whispered weakness. By the time the afternoon sun spilled across the skyline, Clara found herself pacing her kitchen, the same sink now perfectly quiet, thanks to Evan Carter. She hesitated only a moment before scrolling through her phone's call log and tapping the last number saved under emergency plumbing. When the knock came an hour later, she didn't know what she expected, but it wasn't the same man standing there, framed by golden light from the setting sun tool bag over his shoulder, faint smile tugging at his lips. "Another emergency?" he asked. "Sort of," she said, but not the kind you fix with a wrench. Evan raised a brow, stepping inside. Should I be worried? She hesitated, her heartbeat unsteady. I have a favor to ask, and it's unorthodox. He leaned against the counter, patient. I'm listening. She exhaled, then blurted before she lost her nerve. I need a date. Evan blinked, clearly caught off guard. A date for the Emerald Gala, she explained quickly. It's a high-profile charity event. Everyone who matters in this city will be there, and I can't show up alone. He let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. You're serious. I'm desperate, she admitted, the words sharp with honesty. I just need someone real, someone who won't talk business all night or try to impress investors. Just someone to stand beside me. Evan rubbed the back of his neck. You've got the wrong guy. I don't own a tux, and I can't tell a Bordeaux from a budget red. I'll handle the tux, she said quickly. And you don't have to talk. Just look convincing. He studied her for a long, quiet moment. And you're offering to pay me, I assume? Clara winced slightly. I didn't mean it that way. I know, he said softly. Still, I'm not a prop, Clara. The sound of her name in his voice startled her, warm, grounded, too real. I didn't mean to insult you, she murmured. It's just, this event matters. My company's reputation, future partnerships, it all unfolds in that room. Evan exhaled, eyes narrowing thoughtfully. All I have to do is show up, smile, and pretend I belong. That's it. He nodded slowly, then said, on one condition. She tilted her head. Which is? If I spend a night in your world, you spend a day in mine. Her brows lifted. You mean your work? The pipes and the trucks? He smiled faintly. Exactly. You get to see what keeps this city running beneath all the glass towers. Clara hesitated. The deal sounded absurd, but something about the steady confidence in his eyes made her say yes before she could stop herself. Deal, she said quietly. Evan's smile deepened, just enough to hint at mischief. Hope you don't regret it. As he walked toward the door, the soft rhythm of his boots against her floor seemed to echo louder than any boardroom applause she'd ever heard. When the door clicked shut, Clara leaned back against the counter, heart thrumming. For the first time in years, she wasn't the one in control, and somehow that both terrified and thrilled her. 2 days passed in a blur of meetings, fittings, and carefully rehearsed control. Clara had sent the tuxedo early that morning along with detailed instructions on where to meet. And still, she wasn't sure he'd actually show up. By 7 that evening, she stood before her full-length mirror, smoothing the emerald fabric of her gown, the one her stylist said made her look untouchable. It hugged her figure just enough to be powerful, but not soft. She told herself it was armor, but deep down, she wondered if it was hiding something else entirely. A knock at the door pulled her back to reality. For a fleeting second, she thought it might be her driver. Then she heard his voice, steady, low, familiar. It's me. Clara opened the door and the air between them shifted. Evan Carter stood there, and for a moment she forgot how to speak. Gone were the flannel and work boots. In their place, a perfectly tailored black tuxedo that framed his broad shoulders and made the room feel suddenly too small. His dark hair was neatly combed back, though a few stubborn strands still fell near his forehead. His jaw was clean-shaven, yet he somehow kept that same quiet ruggedness. She remembered for a long second. Neither of them said a word. His eyes, those calm blue eyes, traveled from her diamond earrings to the curve of her dress before he smiled faintly. You clean up well, he said, voice softer than she'd ever heard it. She found herself smiling back before she could stop it. I was about to say the same thing. He adjusted his cufflink, glancing around her penthouse. I feel like I should be holding a glass of expensive whiskey and talking about hedge funds just to blend in. Clara laughed, really laughed, and the sound surprised even her. You just have to stand there and look convincing, she teased, grabbing her clutch. Think you can manage that? Evan offered his arm, the gesture both playful and sincere. Guess we'll find out. The Emerald Gala was held at the Old Langley Conservatory, a masterpiece of glass and chandeliers overlooking the Puget Sound. As their car pulled up, the hum of conversation and the shimmer of camera flashes filled the night air. Clara felt the familiar pressure, the eyes, the whispers, the weight of perfection. But when Evan stepped out and turned to offer his hand, that pressure eased. His grip was steady, grounding, like an anchor in a sea of performance. Inside, every gaze seemed to find them. The city's most powerful names circled the room like constellations. Every diamond, every tailored suit, another piece of the unspoken hierarchy she'd mastered long ago. And yet, as they walked through it together, something about having him there changed the rhythm. She wasn't performing, she was present. Evan moved with a quiet confidence that didn't try to impress. When a waiter passed, he took 2 glasses of champagne, handed her one, and smiled like they were the only 2 people in the room. For a man who didn't belong in this world, he didn't seem the least bit shaken by it. Leaning closer, Clara whispered, "They're already trying to figure out who you are." Evan chuckled, the sound low and warm near her ear. "Let them wonder." She tried not to show how that sent a chill down her spine. He wasn't supposed to fit in, and yet he did, effortlessly. She caught herself watching the way he navigated the room. Calm, self-assured, grounded in a way that no tailored suit could fake. And as the night unfolded, glasses clinking, laughter echoing beneath chandeliers, Clara realized she was doing something she hadn't done in years. She was exhaling. For once, she wasn't thinking about numbers or strategy or image. She was simply standing beside a man who made her forget that life was supposed to be a performance. When he leaned over, his tone teasing, eyes glinting under the soft light, he murmured, "You sure I'm pulling this off?" Clara met his gaze, lips curving just slightly. "More than you know." The gala had already found its rhythm. Music pulsed softly beneath the glitter of chandeliers, and conversations hummed like champagne bubbles rising to the surface. Clara glided through the crowd with Evan at her side, her every step practiced grace. But her mind wasn't on the investors or the headlines waiting for tomorrow. It was on the man beside her, the one who looked perfectly at ease among people who'd spent their lives trying to appear effortless. He didn't cling, didn't posture. He just was, calm, grounded, as though he'd spent his life standing in rooms like this, though she knew he hadn't. It was almost unnerving how easily he belonged. "Ms. Hayes," a smooth voice cut through the air. Clara turned, her smile froze, polite but taut. Richard Moore, CEO of Titan Investments, rival, opportunist, and her favorite kind of adversary, the kind who underestimated her every time. "Richard," she greeted, her tone polished. "Enjoying the evening?" "Trying to," he said, his eyes flicking toward Evan with calculated curiosity. "And who might this be?" Before Clara could answer, Evan extended his hand, calm and sure. "Evan Carter." Richard took it, his smile sharp enough to cut glass. "Carter, Carter, I don't think we've met. What line of business are you in, Mr. Carter?" It was the tone, the faint curl of disdain. The curiosity meant more to corner than to connect, the kind Clara had faced 100 times before. She braced herself to intervene, but Evan didn't miss a beat. His expression remained easy, eyes steady. "I build things," he said simply. "She invests in them. Seems like a natural partnership." For a moment, silence stretched thin between crystal flutes and murmuring voices. A few nearby guests had caught the exchange, waiting for Richard's reaction. Then, like a ripple of oxygen in a room that had forgotten to breathe, soft laughter broke out. Not mocking, but surprised, appreciative. Even Richard's smirk faltered just for a second. Clara's lips curved, not the practiced, photo-ready smile she wore for the press, but something smaller, genuine. She turned slightly toward Evan, catching his profile under the amber light. Steady jaw, unbothered eyes, quiet composure. It struck her how different he was from every man she'd met in this world of polished ambition. He wasn't trying to prove anything. He didn't need to. "Well," Richard said finally, tone tight, "you've certainly found yourself someone with perspective." Clara tilted her head. "That's one way to put it." Richard gave a short nod and excused himself, the faintest trace of irritation in his stride as he disappeared into the crowd. Evan turned back to her, brow arched just slightly. "Did I pass the test?" "You did more than that," she murmured. "You disarmed him." "Didn't know we were armed," he said, a hint of humor tugging at his voice. "In this room, everyone is," she replied softly. Evan's gaze lingered on her then, thoughtful. And you've been standing in the crossfire a long time, haven't you? Her throat tightened. She looked away, scanning the glittering sea of faces. Long enough to forget what it feels like to let my guard down. Maybe tonight's a start, he said. The band shifted to a slower tune. Clara realized her pulse had synced with the rhythm of his voice, slow and steady. Around them, the crowd shimmered. Half illusions, half intentions. But in that brief moment, it felt like the room had narrowed to just the two of them. Evan offered his hand, not for a handshake this time, but for something quieter, gentler. Dance with me, he said. She hesitated only a breath before placing her hand in his. The world around them blurred. Amahano, dear, laughter, ambition, the endless noise of people trying to matter. And for once, Clara Hayes wasn't performing. She was simply being seen. The ballroom shimmered under chandeliers, laughter rippling like champagne over glass. Yet somewhere between the string quartet and the scent of roses, Clara realized she couldn't breathe. The night had gone perfectly. Too perfectly. Evan had fit into her world with unnerving ease, handling Richard's snide question with grace that left her both relieved and unsettled. She'd told herself this was just business, a temporary illusion, but illusions weren't supposed to feel this real. I need a minute, she murmured. Evan caught her tone and followed as she slipped through the glass doors onto the balcony. The air outside was cool, almost cleansing. Below them, Seattle glittered, 1,000 points of light reflected on the water, the hum of the city softened by distance. For a long moment, neither spoke. Beautiful view, he said finally, resting his hands on the stone railing. Clara nodded, her voice quiet. I come here every year, but somehow I never notice it. That's because you're busy running the world inside. She let out a soft laugh, the sound half sigh. Someone has to. Evan turned slightly toward her. The breeze caught a strand of her hair, pulling it across her cheek before she could reach for it. His hand moved, gentle, unhurried, as he tucked it back behind her ear. His fingers lingered for just a second longer than they should have. Clara froze. Her mind told her it was nothing, a polite gesture, a fleeting courtesy, but her pulse didn't agree. The warmth of his hand stayed on her skin even after it was gone, traveling straight to the place she'd trained herself not to feel. He leaned against the railing again, looking out at the skyline. You know, he said softly, for someone who spends her life surrounded by people, you look awfully alone. The words hit her like the truth she didn't ask for. And you read people now? She tried to deflect. Only the ones who pretend they don't need to be read. She met his gaze then, steady, blue, impossibly kind. You think you've got me figured out? Evan gave a small shrug, the ghost of a smile tugging at his mouth. Not yet, but I know the look of someone who's forgotten what it's like to be seen. Something inside her stilled. She wanted to laugh it off, say something sharp, something clever. Instead, she whispered, maybe I just don't know how anymore. For a heartbeat, silence hung between them, heavy, intimate. Then Evan said, you don't have to try. Some things don't need fixing. The irony made her smile. She turned her head toward him, eyes softening. You're a plumber, Evan. You fix everything. He chuckled, low and warm. Not this time. The sound faded into the night, replaced by the quiet rhythm of the city below and the faint music drifting through the glass doors. Somewhere inside, the gala continued, deals being made, laughter rehearsed. But out here, it felt like another world. Their shoulders brushed as she leaned on the railing, the accidental contact small, electric. She didn't move away. Neither did he. When she finally looked up, his eyes were already on her. Steady, patient, unreadable. It was supposed to be a game, an arrangement, a convenient facade to fill a social obligation. But standing there under the pale city light, Clara couldn't remember what was real and what wasn't. He took a slow breath, his voice barely above a whisper. Careful, Clara. People might start to think we mean it. She smiled, but her chest tightened. Maybe we already do. For a long, suspended moment, the noise of the party vanished, their world narrowing to the quiet between their breaths. Neither moved, but the distance between them had already disappeared. Morning came gray and cool, the kind of Seattle dawn that blurred sky and water into the same soft silver. Clara Hayes stood on the corner of Harbor and Fifth, the heels she normally lived in replaced by plain white sneakers, the jeans stiff from disuse, the blouse too casual for her comfort. She'd spent half the night convincing herself this wasn't a mistake. This was simply her keeping a promise, a deal, nothing more. Yet when she saw Evan's old blue pickup pull to the curb, something in her chest fluttered in a way logic couldn't explain. He leaned out the window, a half smile playing at his lips. Didn't think you'd actually show. I keep my word, she said, stepping closer. Then let's go keep mine. He nodded toward the passenger side and she climbed in. The cab smelled faintly of sawdust and coffee. A small plastic dinosaur sat on the dashboard, paint chipped and bright. Somehow that tiny toy felt more honest than anything in her penthouse. They drove out of the city's glass and steel into a quieter stretch near the harbor. Evan didn't talk much. He didn't have to. The silence between them felt natural, filled with the hum of the engine and the occasional sound of gulls. When he finally turned onto a cracked parking lot in front of a low brick building, Clara blinked at the faded sign above the door. Harbor Light Community Center. This is it? She asked. This is it, he confirmed, climbing out. Needs work. Paint's peeling. Playgrounds falling apart. City's slow to fix what doesn't make headlines. He opened the back of the truck, unloading buckets of paint and boxes of tools. Clara hesitated, eyeing her manicure, the dirt, the chipped bricks. You really do this every weekend? Every chance I get, he grinned, handing her a paint roller. Don't worry, you'll pick it up fast. It's just like handling a merger, only messier. Before she could answer, a small voice shrieked, Daddy! A little girl came flying across the yard, her hair a tumble of dark curls, paint already on her cheeks. Evan crouched to catch her, laughing as she threw her arms around his neck. Hey, Bug, you ready to work? Always, the girl said proudly. Then, noticing Clara for the first time, she froze mid-step, eyes wide. Who's she? Evan glanced up, a soft smile tugging at his lips. This is Clara. She's helping us today. The girl's gaze swept over the woman in pressed jeans and a crisp blouse. After a long moment, she whispered in awe, You look like a princess. Clara blinked. What? A princess, the girl repeated matter-of-factly, from one of my storybooks. Evan chuckled, setting down a toolbox. See, I told you royalty would show up if we cleaned up enough. Clara felt something unfamiliar tighten behind her ribs. She knelt slightly, meeting the child's curious eyes. Thank you, Lucy, she said softly, but I'm afraid I left my crown at home. Lucy giggled, the sound bright and unfiltered. That's okay. You can borrow mine. She ran off to fetch a tiny paper crown from a craft table nearby and placed it very carefully on Clara's head. Evan watched the scene unfold, amusement glinting in his eyes. Looks like you've been officially promoted, he said. Clara laughed, genuinely, freely. I'll make sure it's in the next press release. For the rest of the morning, she painted alongside them, her sleeves rolled up, hair coming loose from its careful twist. The walls turned from dull gray to sky blue under her uncertain strokes. Every so often, Lucy would dart over to show her a new masterpiece, and Clara would nod as if she were evaluating fine art. By noon, her arms had ached, her nails were ruined, and her heart felt strangely light. Evan handed her a bottle of water, his eyes warm. You did good, Clara. She looked at the bright blue wall, then at him, then at the tiny crown still balanced awkwardly in her hair. Maybe, for once, she murmured, good is enough. And for the first time in a long time, she meant it. By midday, the air inside Harbor Light smelled of fresh paint and sawdust. Sunlight slanted through the high windows, catching the dust motes that danced in the air like tiny golden ghosts. Clara had abandoned any attempt at elegance. Her once white blouse was smudged with streaks of blue, and there was a green handprint suspiciously close to her shoulder where Lucy had helped. For the first time in as long as she could remember, she didn't care. Evan moved easily through the space, a rhythm in every motion, guiding volunteers, tightening bolts, sanding edges smooth. When he handed her the drill, Clara hesitated. I'm more of a spreadsheets kind of woman, she warned. He grinned, eyes gleaming under the brim of his cap. Then consider this a new investment. Manual labor, high return, low glamour. She shot him a look, but took the drill anyway. The vibration startled her at first, but when the screw slid perfectly into place, she laughed, an unguarded sound that filled the room. That was oddly satisfying. Told you, Evan said, leaning against a ladder. Everything can be fixed if you know how. Even broken people? She asked before she could stop herself. His smile softened. Especially them. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Lucy ran up, waving a paintbrush like a sword. Daddy says I'm in charge of the blue wall. Can Miss Clara help, Miss Clara? Evan teased. Promotion suits you. Only if I get benefits, she shot back, grabbing a roller. They spent the afternoon side by side, painting, sanding, fixing. Clara's laughter came more easily now. She found herself humming along to the radio, her voice mixing with the scrape of brushes and the sound of Lucy's small, happy chatter. Each time she looked over, Evan was already watching her. A quiet warmth behind his gaze that made her forget the chill of boardrooms and deadlines. When the last wall was done, she stepped back, brushing a stray strand of hair from her cheek. The dull gray that had once covered the room was gone, replaced by a soft ocean blue that seemed to breathe life into the old space. It's beautiful, she said, surprised by how much the words meant. Evan capped the paint can, glancing up at the wall. Not bad for a princess and a plumber. She laughed again, light, easy, the kind that felt unfamiliar but good. You're enjoying that title a little too much. Maybe, he said, wiping a streak of paint from her jaw with his thumb. His hand lingered a fraction too long, and Clara's breath caught. She told herself it was just gratitude, just proximity, but the quiet flutter in her chest said otherwise. Outside, the sun began to dip low, washing the world in amber light. Lucy twirled in the yard, her shoes kicking up dust, her laughter echoing through the open doors. Clara leaned against the truck, exhaustion settling deep in her muscles, but not in her heart. She hadn't realized how heavy her days had become until this one felt light. Evan handed her a bottle of water, his expression unreadable but soft. You did good work today, Clara. She met his gaze, realizing how much she liked hearing her name from him. You make it sound like I built the whole place. He shrugged. Maybe you built something better. Before she could ask what he meant, Lucy came bounding over, cheeks flushed, paint in her hair. Miss Clara, she said breathlessly, are you coming back? Clara froze. Her entire life had been built on instant answers. Yes, no, always, never. But this time she hesitated, feeling something shift quietly inside her. Then she smiled, slow and certain. Yeah, she said. I think I will. Lucy grinned widely and ran off again, the sound of her laughter trailing behind her like sunlight. Evan didn't speak, but the look in his eyes said enough. As the last light of the day spilled over the blue walls, Clara Hayes, for the first time in years, felt something unfamiliar and terrifyingly simple. Peace. The drive back to the city was quiet, not the awkward kind of silence that begged to be filled, but the sort that carried everything unspoken. The truck's headlights cut through the dusk, tracing the wet shimmer of Seattle streets. Clara sat with her hands folded in her lap, her nails still faintly tinted blue from the paint. She should have felt ridiculous, a CEO returning from a day of manual labor. But all she felt was calm. Her muscles ached. Her hair smelled faintly of sawdust and sunlight. And somehow that grounded her more than any boardroom ever had. When Evan pulled up in front of her building, she hesitated before unbuckling her seatbelt. The city glowed behind the windshield, 1,000 stories stacked in light. Thanks for today, she said softly. He nodded. Didn't scare you off then? Not yet, she teased. Then after a pause, would you like to come up for a drink? Evan's hand stilled on the gear shift. Clara, no excuses, she interrupted gently. Just come up for a second. He studied her face, searching maybe for hesitation, maybe for permission. And whatever he found there was enough. He turned off the engine. The elevator ride up was quiet, their reflections shifting together in the mirrored walls. When the doors opened to her penthouse, the faint scent of vanilla and rain lingered in the air. The city stretched out beyond the glass, its lights rippling across the bay like stars fallen too close. Clara set her bag on the counter and turned on a single lamp. The glow was soft, golden, more intimate than she meant it to be. Whiskey? She asked, already reaching for the bottle. Whatever you're having, he said. She poured 2 glasses, handed him one, and leaned against the counter. You handled yourself well today, she said. Even Lucy was impressed. He smiled at that, taking a slow sip. She likes you. That's rare. Clara tilted her head. And you? Evan met her eyes over the rim of his glass. I'm still deciding. She laughed, but it came out quieter than she intended. Honest, I like that. They stood there, the space between them small but charged. Outside, rain began to tap against the windows, soft and steady. Inside, the hum of the city faded until all she could hear was the sound of her own pulse. Evan set his glass down. You're thinking too hard again. She smiled faintly. I'm not used to this feeling. He took a slow step toward her, then stopped. Thinking. It wasn't a command, it was an invitation. She didn't move away when he reached up, brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear, the same way he had on the balcony. But this time his hand stayed, his thumb traced the line of her jaw, and she forgot every line she'd drawn between them. When he kissed her, it wasn't planned and it wasn't perfect. It was slow at first, almost cautious, like they were both waiting to see if the world would stop spinning. Then it deepened, urgent, inevitable. The kind of kiss that made time feel like an afterthought. When they finally pulled apart, breathless, neither spoke. Evan's forehead rested against hers, the warmth of his hands still on her waist, her pulse racing beneath his touch. This is a bad idea, he murmured, voice roughened by restraint. Probably, she whispered, smiling through the truth of it. And yet, neither stepped back. The city lights burned quietly beyond the glass. The rain kept falling, patient and steady. Somewhere between whiskey and silence, between what was real and what was supposed to be, Clara Hayes realized something terrifyingly simple. She didn't want to go back to the world before him. Morning came soft and unhurried, the kind of quiet that only follows something that's changed you. Clara woke to the faint smell of coffee and something warm and sweet drifting through the penthouse. For a heartbeat, she forgot where she was, or rather, she remembered where she wasn't. She wasn't at the office or in some hotel suite preparing for a meeting. She was home, and someone else was there. She slipped on a robe and padded down the hall. Evan stood at her stove, barefoot, a spatula in one hand, flipping pancakes that were slightly uneven but golden. The sight stopped her in place. Her kitchen, normally sleek, still, and almost sterile, was suddenly alive with movement and the low hum of a man humming under his breath. You cook, she said softly. He glanced over his shoulder, a crooked grin tugging at his mouth. Sometimes, Lucy's favorite. Thought I'd see if they'd pass CEO standards. She smiled despite herself. That's a high bar. He plated a stack and slid one toward her. I'll risk it. Clara cut a bite and tasted it, warm, a hint of cinnamon, not perfect but comforting in a way perfection never was. She set her fork down, her chest tightening unexpectedly. It's good, she said quietly. High praise, he teased, pouring them both coffee. They stood at the counter together, the morning light spilling through the tall windows. For a while there was peace, simple, unassuming, until she realized how dangerous it felt. Domesticity was something she'd long erased from her vocabulary. And yet, here it was, sneaking in with the smell of pancakes and the sound of someone else's breath beside hers. Evan caught her silence. You look like you're planning an escape. She exhaled a laugh that wasn't quite a laugh. I don't do this. I don't let people in. His voice softened. Why not? Clara looked down at her coffee, the reflection trembling in the cup. Because people leave or they disappoint you. And somewhere along the way, I stopped giving them the chance. Evan leaned against the counter, studying her with that calm, unwavering gaze. I'm not them. She met his eyes then, steady, blue, certain, and wanted to believe it. For a moment, she almost did. But belief required trust, and trust was a muscle she hadn't used in years. Before she could answer, her phone buzzed sharply across the counter. The sound broke the spell like glass. She saw her assistant's name flash on the screen. Work. The real world was calling her back. She answered quickly, slipping into that other voice, the one made of steel and control. The conversation was brisk, precise, and necessary. When she hung up, The air in the kitchen had shifted. Evan didn't say anything, but the distance between them had already grown. "I have to go," she said, almost apologetic. "Something came up at the office." He nodded, not unkindly. "I figured." She hesitated at the doorway. "Dinner tonight?" A small smile ghosted across his face. "Yeah, dinner." By evening, Clara had convinced herself it was just that, a meal, nothing more. She set the table, chose the wine carefully, and told herself she was being rational. But when Evan arrived, dressed in dark jeans and that quiet confidence she'd come to recognize, the room filled with a different kind of silence. Dinner was warm, but restrained. They talked about Lucy, about the community center, about everything except the things sitting between them. When the plates were cleared, she found herself looking at him across the table, wanting to say something that might hold him there, but her pride kept her still. Evan pushed his chair back, stood, and grabbed his jacket. "Thanks for dinner," he said softly. "I had a good time, more than I should have." "Evan," she started, but the words failed her. He smiled then, gentle and sad, and left before she could find them again. When the door clicked shut, the echo lingered far too long. Clara sank into her chair, the taste of cinnamon and regret still on her tongue. For the first time in years, she realized that what she'd lost wasn't control. It was connection, and she wasn't sure she knew how to get it back. Rain had a way of softening Seattle, turning the city's edges into watercolor, making even its loneliness feel quieter. Clara stood beneath her umbrella that afternoon, waiting for her driver. When she saw them across the street, Evan and Lucy, framed by the glow of a bakery window, the little girl pressing her nose to the glass, pointing excitedly at something behind the counter while her father crouched beside her, smiling as though the world had stopped just for that moment. Clara froze. She could have turned away, could have stepped into the waiting car and driven back to her world of deadlines and distance, but she didn't. She stood there in the drizzle, watching them, the ache in her chest returning with cruel precision. Then Lucy turned and saw her. The child blinked, surprise. Then her face lit up like sunlight breaking through the rain. "Princess!" she shouted, waving so hard her umbrella toppled. Evan looked up, startled, following his daughter's gaze, and when his eyes found Clara across the street, the world stilled. He said something to Lucy, and together they crossed when the light turned green. Clara's pulse quickened with every step they took closer, the sound of the rain mingling with her heartbeat. "You're everywhere lately," Evan said lightly when they reached her, though his voice carried something beneath the words, something careful. Clara tried to smile. "I could say the same." Lucy looked between them, her grin unshakable. "Daddy bought cupcakes. Do you like cupcakes?" Clara hesitated, her throat tight. "I don't usually eat them." Lucy gasped in mock horror. "How do you live?" Evan laughed softly, shaking his head. "You're not helping, Bug." "She can come with us," Lucy insisted, tugging at his sleeve. "Please." He looked at Clara, rain dripping from his hair, his eyes searching hers. "What do you say?" And she surprised herself with the answer. "All right." They walked together, the three of them, through quiet streets slick with rain. Evan's house sat at the edge of a small neighborhood, modest, warm, alive inside. Lucy darted off to set the cupcakes on the kitchen table while Clara stood near the doorway, taking in the space, the scent of coffee and cedar, the worn leather couch, the faint hum of music from a record player in the corner. It felt real in a way her penthouse never had. Evan leaned against the counter, arms folded. "Didn't think I'd see you again." Clara met his gaze, steady but soft. "I didn't think so either." "What changed?" he asked quietly. She took a slow breath. "I saw you," she said, voice trembling. "And for the first time in my life, I didn't want to walk away because I realized I've been running from everything that ever felt real, and I don't want to anymore." For a moment, he said nothing. Then he stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him even in the cool air. "Then let's figure it out," he said softly. "Let's learn how to stay." Something in her broke open then, the careful walls, the rehearsed control. She smiled through tears she didn't bother to hide. "Okay," she whispered. A month later, Harbor Lights stood gleaming with new paint and laughter. The community center was alive again, filled with voices and the smell of fresh bread from the bake sale Lucy had organized herself. Reporters snapped photos as the little girl held oversized scissors and cut the red ribbon, her grin pure triumph. Clara stood nearby, clapping with the crowd, her eyes shining. She felt an arm wrap gently around her waist. Evans, and leaned into him without thinking. The sound of celebration swelled around them, but all she could hear was the quiet steadiness of his heartbeat against her back. For the first time, Clara Hayes wasn't thinking about quarterly returns or market shares. She wasn't building something to prove she could. The story of Clara Hayes and Evan Carter delivers a heartfelt lesson about the courage to embrace vulnerability and the unexpected connections that reshape our lives. Clara, a CEO armored by control and ambition, finds her world disrupted by a simple act of kindness from Evan, a single father and plumber, whose quiet strength and devotion to his daughter Lucy challenge her guarded existence. Their journey from a staged gala date to a shared day of painting and laughter reveals that true connection requires letting go of facades and stepping into someone else's world. Evan's grounded presence and Lucy's unfiltered joy teach Clara to trade her polished perfection for the messiness of love, showing us that life's greatest rewards come when we dare to be seen, flaws and all. This story stirs the heart, reminding us to look beyond titles and embrace the people who make us feel alive. It urges us to take risks, not in boardrooms, but in relationships, where trust and presence outweigh ambition. Have you ever found courage in a moment of connection that changed you? What part of Clara and Evan's story moved you most? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let's spark a conversation about the moments that make us feel truly at home. If this tale of love, vulnerability, and second chances touched you, hit that subscribe button for more stories that remind us of the beauty in staying human. Join our community, and let's keep building connections that matter.